everyone and welcome back to my YouTube channel. So I am sorry I've not been around on my YouTube for a little while, but I thought what better day to come back than a week before the big day when all of the new doctors start their career in the NHS. If you're new here, my name's Jasmine and I'm coming to the end of my first 2 years as a doctor. So I am currently a foundation year 2 doctor and I have 4 shifts left of the entire foundation training, which still seems pretty surreal, to be honest. If you followed over on my Instagram for a while, you probably will have seen that I didn't have the smoothest start to F1. I did struggle a bit for a few different reasons. And I do think that the jump from medical school into working life as a doctor is inevitably hard for most, if not everyone. I think everyone has their different challenges and approaches it in different ways, but at the end of the day, it is a big jump in responsibility that's pretty much happened overnight. One day you're a medical student, and then all of a sudden you're the doctor on the wards. And of course, we've all got through medical school, we've all passed our finals, and we are very much qualified to be in that position. But it just takes a while to adjust to that shift in responsibilities and to get used to the way everything works, and it's so normal to feel nervous before that change. For me, 2 years on after starting life as a doctor, I feel like I've got a completely different perspective now, and although there are still challenges sometimes and sometimes still hard days, I would say I'm someone who does love my job as a doctor and I'm excited for a career in medicine. During my foundation training, I've also confirmed the specialty that I want to do, which is paediatrics, and I have always had the idea that I wanted to do paediatrics, but it was only when I did my F2 job in peds and also did my taster week that I was definitely set on that decision. And I do think that was also a bit of a turning point for me. I think there's something about finding out where your passion lies in medicine and the specialty that you really want to do that just help keep you inspired and keep you motivated, even if you're rotating through other specialties or having different challenges along the way. Over the last 2 years since starting work as a doctor, I have been very mindful of keeping note of things that I've learned and reflections I've made that I think would have been helpful to know at the start of F1, and particularly over F1 I have collated all that information into a big ebook that is available over on my website, and I will link that in the description. I'll put a copy of the contents page here as well so you can see the sort of things that I've included in the ebook. So yeah, I'll link that down below if you think that might be helpful at all. So I feel like that was a bit of a waffly intro. I'm going to structure the video in a Q&A style just because there's so many different things that I want to say. I feel like it was hard to structure the video into having like different topics. I did put a question box over on my Instagram yesterday where I got lots and lots of questions, so most of them have come from there, but also I've added in a few that I've got from final year medical students who I've met on placement recently, and also just a couple that I've added in myself because they're things I want to say and I think are important to know before starting F1. I will timestamp the questions in the description if you're looking for a specific thing. Hopefully I can figure out how to do that. I've not yet done that on my YouTube video. Question number 1 is, what did you struggle with as an F1 and how did you overcome these things? I really like this question because I think it's acknowledging that there are going to be some struggles, but things can be overcome and you can move forward from there. I think one thing that a lot of incoming doctors worry about is lack of support in a clinical environment, and that is something I experienced early on in F1 and is something that's quite tricky to deal with. I will say that does get better with time. As your skill set, your experience and your confidence increases as a doctor, you will find yourself perhaps needing less of certain types of support as you go through, and that can be a nice reflection as you're going through foundation years. But I know that doesn't really answer the question of how to overcome it in the beginning. I wish I could wave a magic wand and have a particular answer for this. I think the biggest thing I would say is if you're trying to escalate something or you're just looking for support in a clinical environment and you're struggling to get it, just keep pushing and find other methods of support. For example, if you're unable to get hold of your reg, maybe it's very understaffed that day and they're busy, they're doing something else, or you're just not able to get hold of them for any reason. Don't let that stop you from seeking support if you feel like you need help with a certain situation. There are always different methods of support, even if it might not feel like it in that moment. So for example, if you're in working hours, there might be other registrars around. There should always be a consultant on call who you can usually contact via switchboard. Another point of call if you are struggling in an acute medical situation can be to contact the med reg on call. Even if you're in a surgical job, if the patient has a medical problem, then your med reg should cover that area as well. Of course, always just going via your hospital guidance for escalation and which doctors cover which patients, etc. Also, just remember, if you're ever in an acute medical situation with that patient in front of you and you feel like it could be appropriate to put out a medical emergency, then that's what it's there for. If you're out of your depth, you don't know what to do, and it's an acute medical situation, no one's going to tell you off for putting out a medical emergency and getting the help with you, and that is the way that you're going to get help quickly if you feel like you need it. It can also be really helpful during induction week to find out if your hospital has any other sources of support. So in my hospital, we had what's called our acute response team, who work both in and out of hours. They do have a different name in the daytime, but I can't remember it off the top of my head. But essentially they are a group of very experienced nurses, nurse practitioners and clinical assistants who can do a wide variety of different jobs between them. They are amazing at what they do. They're very, very experienced. And in our hospital, they had a bleep number that you could call, and they can either help you over the phone or come and see the patient as well. And it's just a different source of support. So it's always worth checking in your hospital what's available. And I have heard from friends in other hospitals that they have like a vascular access team, so people you can call if you're struggling with bloods and cannulas. So it's just good to know what support is available. So yeah, I guess that's my main way of overcoming that. Other things I struggled with in F1, I guess on calls initially, again, something that everyone worries about. That can be tricky when you first start them. I had my first set of on calls quite early in F1, I think it was in my second week, and I did the Monday to Friday of surgical ward cover twilight, so they were 5 till midnight, and then I did 2 long days at the weekend. And that was quite a new experience that initially did feel quite overwhelming. Looking back now, I think the main way I overcame that and gradually got better at doing those types of shifts were prioritising jobs and managing my time well. You're likely to have a bleep or another way of getting jobs through, and things can come through quite quickly, which can make it feel a lot, especially in the beginning. One of my main tips for that would be to always have an A4 sheet of paper and a pen with you, or always 2 pens actually, in case one of them runs out. But I like to have one of those pens where you can use like 4 different colours, and I would split up my piece of paper on a ward cover shift into all of the different wards, and as jobs came through I would write them down. Even if it's something that seems quite basic, or you think you're not going to forget because you'll do it in a minute, you could get another bleep in a moment, or you could get called to a medical emergency or something. So I just always think it's worth writing everything down, especially in the beginning of F1, to make sure you don't forget anything. And then if you are feeling a bit overwhelmed by the number of jobs you've got to do, just take a moment to look at what's come through, evaluate what is the most urgent. Like, of course, an unwell patient is going to take priority over doing a discharge summary, for example, and just set yourself a bit of a plan. Also think geographically if you need to go to lots of different wards, particularly if they're non-urgent tasks. It can be helpful to group jobs together, so you can go to one ward, get everything done, go to the next ward, get everything done, and that way you're not going backwards and forwards and wasting time. I think a lot of it is just being efficient with your time. Also, I think a big thing is to get a grasp of what is and isn't an on-call job. So on-call shifts are typically evenings, nights and weekends. I don't want to get myself in trouble by giving a list of things that aren't on-call jobs, because obviously in certain situations things might need doing more urgently. But over time, just getting a feel for what could be done either in the morning or the next day by the parent team who knows the patient. And I think what can be quite helpful with that is asking yourself the question of, is this job that I'm doing going to change the patient care now or before the next day? Obviously, if the answer is yes, if it's going to change their care, if it's going to change their progression of what's happening, then absolutely go ahead and do it. But if it's a very non-urgent task, or perhaps more of an administrative task that could be done by the parent team, then just acknowledging that and perhaps have that discussion with the nursing team or whoever's asking you to do that job. And chances are they might be in agreement with you. They might have just been trying to be efficient and get things done by the next day, which is absolutely fine. But sometimes just letting them know how busy you are and asking whether that could wait till the next day, I think is completely reasonable. I feel like I've already spent a lot of time talking just on that first question, but I feel like it is quite a big one. I do just want to add in one more thing that I struggled with in the beginning, and then I promise I'll move on. It was the feeling of not really loving my first job as a doctor after having worked towards that goal for so long. I do feel like that's a bit of a depressing one, but it's something that I want to be honest about because I know that other people do go through the same thing. Yeah, I guess I just put my heart and soul into becoming a doctor for so many years, and starting into a new F1 job that I didn't necessarily love. I hadn't really found my feet, and I was kind of questioning some things, and that was really difficult. Again, I'm not saying any of this to scare anybody, and I really hope people don't feel the same at the beginning of F1 as I felt, but if anyone does have that experience, I just want to tell you that it does get better. You will grow so much as a doctor and a person in those 2 years, and even in those first few months, it's really nice to reflect on all the progress you've made. Do your best while you're in that job, take everything you can from it and learn as much as you can, but sometimes it is just a change of job, a change of environment, a change of the specialty, that can make things look up. Next one is a bit of a happier question, and that is, what were some things that you worried about before starting F1 that were actually completely fine? This is actually a question I've added in myself, because a lot of the questions I got were people worrying about things or asking what they can do to make some of the struggles better, but I wanted to say some things that were a worry that actually didn't need to be. My first one there was making friends. As someone who absolutely adores my uni friends and had a very strong knit group of friends in university, I don't know if I'd say worried, but I kind of had that expectation that I might not make strong friendships during life as a doctor, and that I might not have that big friend group experience again. Yeah, like I thought I would make friends, but I wasn't sure whether I would have like strong friendships like I had in uni. I was so wrong. I've made so many amazing friendships during F1 and F2. I've definitely got some friendships that will be with me for life. There have been so many different activities and things that we've planned outside of work throughout the 2 years, and we've done lots of wholesome activities. There's been lots of nights out, lots of doctors' mess socials, and we've also had quite a few balls or formals as well, which is also something I didn't know if that would continue after med school. I think my biggest tip there is just to really immerse yourself in the social activities, especially in the first few weeks and months of F1. I know it can seem daunting, especially if you don't know anyone else in your trust, but most people will be in the same position of wanting to make friends. So just let yourself say yes to things. If there are doctors' mess events that you can sign up to, or if people are going out for dinner after work, or just anything like that, even if it can feel a bit uncomfortable initially, I really do think it's worth doing, because they're the people who are going to support you through the next 2 years. Another thing that I really worried about before starting F1 and even throughout the year was night shifts. So I didn't have my first set of night shifts until my second rotation, which was medicine. But my experience is that my night shifts really weren't that bad. I've already touched upon our acute response team, who are a source of support in our hospital, and they were a massive help for me on my night shifts. I feel like my night shifts were a lot more supported than I expected, and I found them a relatively positive experience overall, and I definitely didn't need to be as nervous. My other job with night shifts was my paediatric F2 job, and they were the only 2 jobs actually for me that had nights, which I think I was quite lucky with. But again, exactly the same thing. I was really supported, it was a good environment, and they were so much better than I expected. Another thing I was a bit worried about that was absolutely fine was booking annual leave. So I know you can hear horror stories about people really struggling to book annual leave, and I do think it varies everywhere and also varies between specialties and rota coordinators. But for every single job throughout foundation training, I've been absolutely fine booking my annual leave. My rota coordinators have all been lovely and really accommodating. But if you do need any specific days off, I would recommend letting your rota coordinator know way in advance, even before you started that job, but also follow it up just to make sure it doesn't get lost or forgotten. And if you need any swaps, so that's if you've got an on-call shift, so either a long day, a weekend or a night, then you might have to swap it to a normal working day, so then you can request the day as annual leave. And my biggest tip for that would be, if you can see everyone else's rotas as well, which normally you can, then you can kind of work out who would be suitable to swap with you. For example, if they've got a set of normal working days when you're on call, and it can just be easier to directly ask that person rather than say putting in the group chat and everyone has to check their own rotas to see if it lines up. It can just be helpful to directly ask someone. Obviously, if they're busy or it doesn't work for them for personal reasons, then that's fine. Either try and find someone else or, you know, put it out in the group chat, but I found that to be quite helpful so far. The next question, which I've had a lot, is should I do any revision or preparation before starting F1? I think as medics and people who have been revising and taking exams for so many years, there can be a natural tendency to feel like you need to revise or do preparation before starting work as a doctor. But just remember that the last 5 or 6 years of medical school are the foundations. You've done all the revision, you've passed your exams, and you are qualified to start work as a doctor. Having said that, I know it can be a bit beneficial to read over certain things, even if it's just for your own peace of mind. One of the things I like to tell people is that for most jobs or things you'll be asked to do as a doctor, there is time to look things up if you need to. And by looking things up, I mean looking at your hospital guidelines, checking the BNF for treatments and doses, things like that. And in most situations, there is time to do that. Guidelines and the BNF are there for a reason. All doctors still use them because that's what they're there for. So having made that point, there are also a few things that you might not have time to look up in an emergency situation. And they're the things that I committed to memory before starting F1. So things like emergency algorithms, most likely they'll already be quite familiar in your head, having just come out of medical school. I know some people can worry about going into particular specialties that they might not be as familiar with. So for example, I started on urology, which I'd only had quite a short period of time in medical school doing. And I did do a bit of reading up before starting just on the key urology conditions and the main initial management and definitive management and just things that come up regularly. Sorry if you can hear Romeo barking. I have waited for a few minutes, but I'm just going to carry on. But my reality was that the actual urological or surgical conditions, the plans are made by the registrar or the consultant in general. And as an F1 or even an F2 on the ward, your job is to do more of the ward job. So like referrals, going through blood tests, doing discharge summaries, and reviewing patients on the ward for things that may or may not be related to that surgical condition but are more of a medical problem. I wouldn't worry too much about going into an unfamiliar specialty because generally the role of an F1 will be similar. So I guess to summarise that, it can be helpful to read up common conditions you'll see in your specialty. I think it's useful to commit to memory things that you wouldn't have time to look up in an emergency. But otherwise, I think the most important thing to prepare for is to know where to find the information if you need it. For example, knowing how to navigate the BNF, knowing where to find your hospital's antibiotic guidelines or your hospital's policies for different conditions. And just to note as well, in my ebook, I've put a list of conditions for lots of different specialties that are the common conditions that you might see and come across as an F1, as well as putting a long list of things that you might be asked to review a patient for, either in an emergency or a non-emergency setting. Next question is what to wear for work, which is quite a basic one, but also a very important question. And I remember asking this myself at the start of F1. So of course, always refer back to your hospital's dress code for what you are and aren't allowed to wear in different areas. But generally in my hospital, you can wear either clinical clothes or scrubs, and it's kind of up to you. Of course, in certain areas like theatres, you have to wear the theatre scrubs, etc. But that's the general rule. I've always opted to wear scrubs over clinical clothes. I just feel more comfortable in them and it takes away any stress of having to choose an outfit the night before. If you have a GP rotation as well, a lot more people wear clinical clothes on GP. I actually still wore scrubs just for the same reason. Also, a good pair of shoes is essential and is something worth investing in if you haven't already. Nothing too extravagant. I've just had a couple of different pairs of trainers throughout the last 2 years, but just shoes that are going to be comfortable for long periods of time. Going back to night shifts, the next question is how to manage sleep and general well-being when on night shifts. So I have already mentioned that I found night shifts to be a lot better than I was anticipating them to be. And that is both in terms of the working element and the general sleep and kind of flipping your sleep schedule side of things. The most important thing is to find a good sleep schedule and routine for night shifts that works for you. And I know so many people do this differently and so many people really preach their own method, but I really think there's no best way to do it. It really is just what works for you. You do have a day off before starting a set of night shifts, and what I do on the evening of that day, so this is the day before you're starting nights, I would generally have a nap in the evening to late evening time. Just kind of whatever feels natural, however long I can sleep for, generally a couple of hours. And then I will wake up again and have a late night on that night before. It's quite nice to have somewhat of a plan for what you're going to do, even if that is just like watching a specific TV series or working on a project or something, just to keep you going. And when I'm saying late night, for me, that was kind of 4, 5 a.m. or just however long I could stay up till really. I am quite a night person anyway, as much as I try and make myself into a morning person. I do quite enjoy being up late at night, so I didn't really have much of a problem with that. And then the next day I would just sleep as long as I could. Like, I wouldn't set an alarm. Even if I kind of woke up gradually, I try and encourage myself to go back to sleep. And having an eye mask and earplugs for that sleep and all of your sleep during the night shifts, I do think is really important. I've also recently got a pair of loop earplugs which have lived up to the hype that I've seen over on Instagram, so if you're looking for a good pair of earplugs, I would recommend those. So yeah, I would sleep as late as I could on the day of nights. Generally I'd probably wake up at about 1-2 p.m. if I've gone to bed kind of early hours of the morning. Sometimes I would do something on that day, like just go to the gym or go shopping or something, but sometimes I would also just have like a nice lazy day. And then in the evening before starting the night shift, I would try and have a nap, but often on that first day I did struggle a little bit at that point. But having woken up so late that day, it does help balance things out a little bit. So essentially staying up late the night before, waking up late the day of nights, and trying to have a nap before going to work. And then when I get home from my night shifts, which was usually about 9:30, 10 a.m. in the morning, then I would eat and shower and pretty much go straight back to sleep. And often at that point it was quite easy for me to fall asleep because I was just exhausted from the shift. Coming out of night shifts, I actually found a bit harder. I know a lot of people try and stay awake on that last day to reset their sleep schedule back to normal, which I absolutely respect the idea, but that never worked for me just because I'm always so exhausted when I get home from a night shift, and there's just no way I could stay awake any longer. On my first ever set of nights, I'd booked to have my nails done at 5 p.m. after I'd finished nights that morning, and I thought it'd be absolutely fine, I can just sleep in the morning, like that's not even a problem. And yeah, I woke up at like 7 p.m. I'd somehow turned off all my alarms and missed the nail appointment. So I've not really got a good example to give for coming out of nights, but also it did kind of work for me. Like, I would sleep in that day, probably stay up quite a bit later because I'm just more awake on that night, but just gradually get back to normal, and that was fine. Another big thing about night shifts is eating, and that's something I probably found most difficult about doing nights. Felt quite sick on night shifts, and I think that probably is a combination of feeling nervous, but also just trying to eat at night time, which is not really natural for our bodies. I personally just couldn't really stomach a proper meal overnight. So my way around that was that I'd eat before and after the night shift. So I would have like tea and breakfast at the kind of normal times, and then I would just take a lot of snacks with me overnight. So things that I found better to eat were just like dry foods like crisps and crackers, and fruit as well, anything that was a bit more refreshing. And finally, and maybe the most important question if you are currently on your induction week, is what to do during induction week to make the transition into F1 easier. So I have actually made a list of things to ask during induction. I have also made a reel on this last year, which I put on my story today. A lot of the things that you need to get to grips with during induction, again, are more logistical things rather than anything clinical, because that's the stuff you know already. One of the big things is working the computer system in your hospital, particularly if you're on a job that consists of ward rounds. Then knowing how to bring up things like blood results, scan results, patients' past medical history, medications, and essentially just being able to navigate the system. So if the consultant or the reg asks for something on ward round, you can bring it up straight away. And similarly for all those things, so for bloods and scans, etc., knowing how to request those things as well, because that will be a big part of your job as an F1. Also referrals, so whether that's urgent or non-urgent, and inpatient and outpatient, just how to go about making those referrals. Of course, also knowing how to write discharge summaries. By that I mean having the practice on actually writing the discharge summary as well, which you probably will have done a little bit of in medical school, but also again just knowing the logistics of how you write a discharge summary, how you add all of the discharge medications on there, how you put any future appointments or follow-up into the discharge, that kind of thing. And of course mentioning medications, getting to grips with your prescribing system, whether that is electronic or on paper. Also how to bleep someone and how to answer your own bleep. So just a simple thing to know how to do before you're on your own on a night shift and you don't know how to answer your bleep. Other things I've written down: who the seniors are in your department and how to contact them. If you're escalating, you need to know how you're escalating and who you're going to bleep. Where to buy food, of course, where to leave your things, and any codes for any rooms, either staff rooms or rooms on the ward as well. I'd recommend just having like a note section on your phone just to put all the codes in, because there will be too many to remember. And where things are kept on the ward as well. If you still have paper notes, just knowing where all the notes are kept, knowing where things like history sheets or referral forms are kept. It just makes things a little bit easier. Like, I'm sure you've even experienced that as a medical student. Like, Even if someone asks you something so basic like, can you get a history sheet out for me, it just feels so much better if you just know where the history sheet is and you can go and get it, rather than having to be like, oh sorry, like I'm new, I don't know where that is. Just little things like that. Obviously any of these things you can also find out after you've started F1. It's absolutely fine to still ask all of these questions after next Wednesday, and also just asking the doctor that you're with, like, is there anything you'd recommend me knowing or anything you think is useful for me to know, and chances are they'll give you the most useful things anyway without you needing to ask. I think that's pretty much it. I've put on here as well just knowing the numbers for other teams for support, so like I mentioned, the vascular access or acute response team. And finally, the big thing just to be able to locate are your trust guidelines, so guidelines for specific conditions and antibiotic guidelines as well. And just going off the back of mentioning antibiotic guidelines, I've also found that pharmacists are such a useful member of the team. They're such a good source of support for anything kind of medication and drug related, and generally even overnight or out of hours there should be an on-call pharmacist. Obviously try not to bother them unless you need to, but I've definitely phoned the pharmacist a few times overnight and they've always been really helpful and also really lovely. I am going to wrap up there, even though I could literally talk about this topic forever, mainly because I've been talking for a long time and my battery is also on 2%. I really hope that this video helps anyone starting F1 next week or in the future. I know it can seem scary at this point, and I also hope I've not made any of it seem more scary. I'm just trying to be completely open and honest about my experiences, the things that were difficult, but also the things that were better than I expected. I promise you'll be absolutely fine, and in 2 years' time, you'll be the one giving advice to the new F1s and telling them that they'll be absolutely fine as well. My battery's about to die, but thank you so much for watching, and really best of luck for starting F1.